Well, Barack Obama's war in Yemen continues to blow back onto the United States, Israel, and now Great Britain, apparently. There's a lot of angry right-wingers on Twitter who love Israel and hate Muslims, who are under the impression, or perhaps they're just lying, when they say that the Houthis are launching unprovoked attacks on America's Navy because Joe Biden is weak. I've already gone over recently what the Houthis are doing is not at all unprovoked. That doesn't mean it's a good thing. I don't think that it's smart necessarily for a very small and weak country that has suffered under siege for a decade to be firing missiles off at the most powerful navy on the planet, perhaps the most powerful navy in human history. I wouldn't say it's a smart move, but it certainly isn't unprovoked, and I certainly can understand why they're doing it. And even though it wouldn't bring back the hundreds of thousands of Yemenis who were slaughtered by the United States over the past decade, I'm sure that it would bring them a bit of, I don't know, what do you call it? It's not joy. You don't take joy in revenge. But I think that ordinary Yemenis would relish in the aftermath if the Houthis were able to sink an American naval vessel. Perhaps even one of the very ships that helped blockade their ports, that kept food, that kept aid, that kept charity from flowing into their country and saving their children and their parents and grandparents from starvation. No nation on the planet at this point, I think, has as much reason to hate the United States as Yemen. Simply because the tragedy of Yemen is so recent and was so intense. Sure, the United States killed more people in Iraq and Afghanistan, but Afghanistan was more of a slow burn. There are certain factions in Afghanistan who agree with the United States, who saw themselves as allies of the United States. And the same is true to a lesser extent, much lesser extent, in Iraq. There are some people in Iraq who were allied in very limited ways with the United States. But even still, the bulk of the casualties at the hands of the Americans, that was quite a few years ago at this point. And not to say that it is out of the memory of the people of Iraq. I'm sure they haven't moved past that. All I'm saying is that the wounds are fresher for the people of Yemen. Listen, there's a big contest. It would be quite the contest. Who has the most reason to hate the United States in the world? It's an interesting debate because there's a lot of leading candidates. There's a lot of people the world over who have good reason to hate the United States. And what's most interesting about that is how ignorant the American people are of their own government's actions and of even the possibility that all of these other countries might have legitimate grievances against the United States military. Any attack on the U.S. military is unprovoked in the minds of your average American. They don't realize that the U.S. military has been on offense nonstop since 1945 and has left millions and millions of bodies in its wake. How there haven't been more 9/11s, I will never understand. I guess the people of the rest of the world are just better at showing restraint than we are. How many 9/11s did the United States commit against the people of Iraq, or the people of Yemen, or the people of Afghanistan, or the people of Syria, really is bizarre when you think of the things that other countries have done in order to be labeled a quote-unquote pariah state by the so-called international community. If there were such thing as a rules-based international order, if that weren't such a nonsensical, propagandistic term, if that term actually meant what it said, the United States would not only be a pariah, the United States would have been invaded from every border, every shore. The United States would have been occupied, broken up, demilitarized, and probably colonized by the rest of the world. After all, that's what we did to Germany and Japan. The whole idea, the rules-based international order, was trying to take the principles of the Second World War, the Allies' principles, and essentially make them permanent. And so, if that were truly the case, and the so-called rules-based international order wasn't just a way of the U.S. trying to thinly justify its assaults on much smaller countries, the U.S. would have met the same fate as Germany and Japan. Our civilians would have been bombed indiscriminately, not the people of Iraq. New York City would have ceased to exist, probably would have been nuked. But instead, we're on top of the world, still hanging on by a thread. Sadly, I don't think that will last through my lifetime. I think I probably will live long enough to see the United States punished for its evil deeds, for the deeds committed in our name, deeds that the ordinary American has no knowledge of and did not consent to. But the same was the case for the people of Japan and Germany, and they were punished nonetheless, slaughtered in the hundreds of thousands, just like the Iraqis. You think the Iraqis had any say over what Saddam Hussein did? You think the Yemenis had any say over what any of the 18 different factions in Yemen were doing? No, but it was ordinary people trying to tend to their flock of sheep, or trying to grow some grain so that they could bake bread for their family or the rest of the people in their village. Those were the folks who were killed. Those were the folks who were punished. We don't live in a fair world where bad people are punished. We live in a world where innocents take the blame for the crimes of politicians and military officers. Now, it's died down, but if this keeps happening, I'm sure that there will be louder and louder calls for the United States to invade Yemen, which a lot of people will probably be surprised to learn that, well, we didn't technically invade Yemen in the sense that there were so-called boots on the ground, but we've been bombing Yemen nonstop for years and years and years, going back to when Obama was president, so about a decade. And to Biden's credit, I think, as I said, I mentioned this before, certainly in the past, but I think I've mentioned it recently. He did sort of roll back the war in Yemen. He didn't really brag about it, didn't talk about it too much, but I believe the U.S. has not been assisting Saudi Arabia. I might be wrong about that. The U.S. end of the war might still be going on, but I think it's over. Nevertheless, if Yemen continues to rightfully seek vengeance against their mortal enemies, the Americans, the United States will get closer and closer to just wiping the entire country off the map. Whoever survived the last decade, they will be swept from the history books. They will be done away with. Immediately after which, all of these Americans who supported going to war and destroying this country will promptly forget about it and never even think about it again. And 5 years from now, you'll ask them about this country, Yemen, where we first destroyed the country and then we wiped out their population finish them off once and for all, because they shot back. After 10 years, they shot back once. So we went to war and destroyed them. These people won't even know what Yemen is. Just like with Libya. These people don't know what Libya is. Libya, isn't that that place with the Lockerbie bomber? Don't they hate us? Oh, if we could just go back to the days of the Lockerbie bomber. Anyway, with that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow.